I've heard my colleagues on both sides say that the threat posed by Communist China is serious. I fully agree. This is an issue that transcends our political parties. And creating the Select Committee on China is our best avenue for addressing it.
The 118th Congress is underway, and after last week's divisive speakers fight, there was a rare note of bipartisanship Tuesday, with the House voting overwhelmingly to create a select committee to investigate the military, economic, and technological threats posed by China. Republican Congressman Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin is the chairman of that new committee. He joins me now. Welcome, Mr. Chairman. Look, a lot of government investigates China right now. We got the Pentagon does a military assessment. Wall Street and others all look at the economy of China. What's the value added for your committee? Why have this committee?
I think there are at least two areas where we can have a unique impact. One is elevating the urgency of the situation and communicating directly to both the American people and the Chinese diaspora as to why they should care about this. For example, we on the Armed Services Committee talk about helping Taiwan defend itself, but it's my observation that we still have a long way to go in terms of explaining why Taiwan matters. Why should someone in Northeast Wisconsin care about cross-strait deterrence in the Indo-Pacific region? So explaining the why to the American people, communicating the stakes is going to be essential. Also, for the very reason you mentioned, that China is spread across multiple committee jurisdictions, you need to have a committee with representatives from all those committees that ensures good ideas for policy and legislation does not slip through the cracks. That is injecting a sense of urgency into the things that we want to get done in this Congress. And I believe even in divided government, even with a narrow Republican majority, there's a lot we can get done in order to better protect ourselves from the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party.
Okay, now you have talked yourself, recommended the U.S. ban TikTok, for example, the TikTok app, because it's a threat to privacy and American security. Are you going to focus at all on China's economic impact in the United States? For example, its purchases of land, its investment in companies, the degree to which it tries influence operations through Confucius Institutes and that sort of thing. Is that going to be part of your ambit?
Absolutely it is. There's really two issues in addition to a TikTok ban, which are on our agenda. And the TikTok ban is bound up in this bigger issue, which is it's the Wild West when it comes to cross-border data flows. There's really no coherent regulatory structure. And as we try and protect ourselves from China, we need to figure out how do we work more closely with our allies on a cooperative data sharing framework. Before he died, Prime Minister Abe in Japan actually outlined something he called data free flow with trust, which is a good model. So that's an issue. You mentioned Chinese land purchases, which is happening in the Midwest. It's happening in Florida. We have various governors like Governor DeSantis, which are taking action. We want to do field hearings, particularly where this is happening near military bases, to understand what's going on and what the right legal framework is to protect ourselves against us. The other thing, when it comes to coercion of Chinese Americans and a transnational coercion strategy, we're seeing quasi-police stations controlled by the CCP pop up here in America. That doesn't seem right to me. We want to do field hearings in New York, talk to local law enforcement officials, talk to the FBI, and understand how do we prevent the CCP from having effectively police stations on American soils that they can use to harass either our citizens or members of the Chinese diaspora.
All right, you know that there are really close business ties between the two countries, a lot of interrelated commerce, huge, enormous, hundreds of billions of dollars in cross-border trade. Do you think that is part of your thinking here going forward that maybe there needs to be a decoupling here, significant decoupling economically between the two countries?
Yes. First, I think we need to recognize with a little bit of humility that this is what makes this competition so complex. In some ways, the new Cold War is more complex than the old because we were never economically entangled with the Soviet Union. We didn't have to consider selective economic decoupling. I think what's reasonable for legislators like myself to ask Wall Street is, why is it that tax-advantaged entities, be they university endowments or state and local pension funds, should be allowed to invest in certain Chinese industries that facilitate the genocide of Uyghur Muslims and facilitate China's military modernization. We don't want, in other words, the health of millions of American retirees to be dependent on China's military ambitions being successful. So I do believe we can consider a framework that still respects free enterprise, still respects the beauty of our capital markets here in America, while at the same time make sure that we are not unwittingly or wittingly funding genocide or Chinese military modernization.
I know you've also spoken about the lack of U.S. military preparedness to defend Taiwan if it would ever come to that. But how does that square with the desire by some of your Republican colleagues in the House to cut defense by $75 billion in the next fiscal year? It doesn't seem to square at all.
Well, it doesn't. It doesn't square. I can guarantee you we're not going to pass a budget resolution that cuts defense. I think where people that are on the more hawkish side of the equation, like myself, need to do a better job, however, is explaining how we're going to ensure that every dollar we spend on defense goes towards hard power, goes towards enhancing our warfighting capability, and doesn't go towards an ever more bloated Pentagon bureaucracy. How do we get our tooth-to-tail ratios, what it's called, in better balance? And how do we figure out how we put hard power, in particular, west of the international date line? I guess, in other words, how do we make sure that the failure of deterrence that we saw in Ukraine doesn't happen in Taiwan? And there, I think my committee can play a supporting role with the Foreign Affairs Committee to ensure that the $18 to $19 billion backlog of defense items that we've approved for sale to Taiwan but haven't been delivered, that gets cleared in the next 2 years. We are not acting with a sense of urgency. And unless we change course, we're going to stumble into a war, the likes of which we haven't seen since World War II.